We'll be starting up here in the top of the hour in a couple of minutes. Just letting you log in. While you're doing so, you might want to go ahead and open up your pods. And if you want, open up the website that's listed on the screen there, polev.com, with David Orr PE in the title. Or you can download the app if you prefer. Another minute or so, we'll get started. Just let people log in. Again, we recommend you open up the chat. That's where we'll send you messages. It's one way out, but you can put your questions in the Q&A pod. And I will be using polls, as you see, poll everywhere, polev.com. So we'll give folks about 30 seconds to finish logging in on at least a cloudy day here in Ithaca. Okay, so good morning and welcome to the first of our foundational webinars for the 2023-24 season. We're going to wind up with a bunch of them this year. We got one extra one on complete streets coming up in a little while, but today we're going to be starting with the basics. So the basics of a good road. My name is David Orr. I'm the director and senior engineer here with the LTAP Center at the Cornell Local Roads program. And it's a cloudy, cool day here in Ithaca. I don't know what it is by you. So we'll get started. Just a couple of preliminaries. If you haven't been to one of these sessions before, down on the bottom of the screen is your audio. Check things like that out. Again, we do recommend you open up the chat pod. That's where we'll put links to a handout we've got, which has some good resources and outlines what's coming up. Plus, it lists all of the webinars we're doing this year and gives you the dates so you can put that in your calendar and sign up. We may ask you to raise your hands now and then, and I'll be doing that actually here in just a couple of minutes to make sure that's working so you know where that is. And again, any questions you've got, throw them in the Q&A. If it's a technical nature, Amanda or Jody, who are sitting in the background helping out, will take care of it. But if it's technical, I'll give you an answer as soon as I can. Okay. This is worth one professional development hour for engineers here in New York State. The only thing is, only the person who's registered can get the credit. And it is counted as a course, however, so that's good news for anybody who cares. If you're outside of New York State and you need to get a professional development hour, you'll need to check with the LTAP Center in your state to see what the rules are. Okay. So let's do a little bit of a welcome, see who's on board. And again, we're going to be going to polev.com/DavidOrPE. Okay. If you opened up your chat pod, Amanda has been great and put a link so you don't have to type that in. You can just click on the link if you've got your chat pod open. So let's find out where you are working. Are you with a town, a city or village, state, federal, tribal, consultants, contractors? And I see we have at least one person who is honest and works for the weekend. That's cool. Okay, let's see what we've got. Okay, and do a quick look at the count of people. I was hoping to get at least half of you to vote. Let's see if we can get half of you to vote there. Yeah, we got over half. Good, that's good to see. So we have some consultants, city and village folks, county folks, town. Good to see. Again, if you're new, that's important. A lot of the town folks, had election this week. So that's something that's pretty useful. If you did wind up just becoming in the office, something to be thinking about. Okay. So what's your job? What is your title? Are you an administrator? running an office? Are you the engineer? Are you the highway superintendent or DPW commissioner? Are you a supervisor or an elected official, board member? None of the above. If you do put none of the above in there, do me a favor and throw into the Q&A what that means, just so we get a sense of who's on the call today. And again, I see we have a lot of engineers and we have a few none of the aboves. Okay. Again, if you can put in what that title means. Okay. No, nobody's brave enough today. Project manager, ADA program analyst. Okay. Okay, so we get a variety of folks. So let's talk a little bit about the basics of roads, but a final thing to do is, and let me clear this. I don't know why I should have cleared last night, but let me reset this up and see where you're from. And I gotta clear it. Hang on, I'm gonna make you redo it again. It's not letting me clear. Technology. Well, I'll assume these are correct. I can't do much about sometimes technology and I'm winning. Polar Bear was fighting me yesterday even more. So at least today it's mostly working. So that's good to see. Okay, so we have folks from all over, and if map's right, we got at least one person from outside the state. Okay. So again, this is the first of our webinars for this fiscal year for us. Our year starts October 1. We'll be doing these throughout the winter, but we'll take breaks. Holidays, we're not doing one next week. The week of Thanksgiving, we won't be doing ones over the holiday break. The last one, in fact, for this calendar year is on the 19th on Complete Streets. We'll be starting up again after the 1st on the 9th or something like that with departmental duties. So talk to your fellow officials, okay? So we'll be doing these through the winter. We'll do a break and then we'll do some more over next summer. And again, if you have the download of the handout, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. So just to start off, and again, get us thinking a little bit. When you say the word road or street, what kind of words do you use for that? Road and street obviously would be one, but what other words do you think of when you think of a road or street? It's on your street signs that you've got there, Jones blank, or Maine blank, or the Denison blank. What do you have there? So let's see what people put in there. Boulevard, highway, yep. Avenue, lane. Road is not there yet. That's interesting. Alley, circle. All kind of fun different things we can come up with. Fast. That's an interesting. I live on fast. Okay. The point is there's all kinds of names and words we could use for our roadways, and they all mean the same thing. Yes, there's some differences between urban and rural. There's certainly differences between a street and the road that's behind me in the photograph. But the reality is a lot of the things are the same. While this is a rural picture behind me, I live on a gravel road in an urban area. So it really comes down to what are the critical things to make that roadway work. Okay, so why do we build roads and streets? Why do we spend the money to put down the structure that's on a roadway? So again, give me some ideas. If you do one word, we'll create a little word law of this and see what you got. Or is this a screen? I can't remember. No, it's a screen. You can type anything you want. Transportation, moving goods from point A to point B. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Travel. It's amazing how much travel time. I just listened to a podcast talking about a couple of reporters who went around the world in less than 80 days back, 100 plus years ago, and that was a big deal. Think about today, we can fly around the world in 24 hours. So connecting communities, deliveries, people getting from point A to point B. Yeah, there's lots of reasons we build roadways and streets. And if you think about that, it does help us as we're planning and thinking about what we're going to be doing. And yes, we need to include bicyclists and trucks and cars and everybody using the roadway. And there is some recreation that goes on. Some of the same things we talk about for roads certainly work for lanes, walkways, paths, even trails. And it should be safe, yeah. So my list, my top three, whenever I think about it, we're really building roads because we're going to be worrying about the traffic that's on the road. We have to worry about a structure. There is a structure for a roadway, and the geometry makes a difference because of who's using the roadway. But of course, safety overlies everything. We have to be safe. And if you're wondering, by the way, the photograph, that's my grandmother, my mom, and my uncle, who are not with us, but in my memories. And think about how life has changed in the 75 years or so that we've had the road system that we've got since World War II. It's pretty amazing, the kind of things and changes we've got, but some things are still the same. So let's talk about a few of those. So the first one is traffic. Traffic, we need to build the roads to handle the loads, but to know that, we have to figure out what is the traffic that's using the roadway. At national parks, this happens to be at Yellowstone, they've got some unique loading conditions that they have to deal with, okay? So who uses your roads and streets? Who do we have to worry about? We already mentioned one, but you can put them down again. Who's actually the people using the public? Okay, yeah. What does the public consist of? Commuters, people going to school, residents, heavy trucks, commercial activities, yep, buses. There's electric buses, which weigh a little bit more. There's taxis. Yep. Again, somebody had said in the last cycle, and there you go, bicyclists, walkers. Okay. And so you have to accommodate all of these different users that are on the roadways or on the sidewalks next to the roadways or in walking on the shoulder or things like that. You got emergency vehicles, which could be everything from an ambulance to a fire truck. You've got the snowplow, of course. So you got to think about all the users. And one of the ways we deal with this to help classify things is we break the system down into a functional classification. Okay. So the functional classification that's typically used deals with principal arterials, minor arterials, collectors, and local roads. That's what most people think about. So a principal arterial, those are the things like the interstate system, are the really, really important roadways that connect cities. Okay. So this is a map showing Ithaca. So the main principal arterials here would be roads like 13 that go through the city and connect over to Dryden and eventually the interstate in Cortland or down south towards Corning. You've got minor arterials like the state roads that come in and out of the city or connect up towards the hospital or things like that. You've got collectors that you might have to deal with, where those collect the traffic and bring it to the arterial system because everybody wants to live on a local road. This is actually one of the problems that we have to deal with. And the fact is, everybody lives, at least in their mind, on a local road. So what happens when you get a roadway that is both a collector and a local road, or sometimes even an arterial and a local road? It can be a bit of a challenge. We have to put some classification down, but it also does mean there's always conflicts when we're dealing with who's using the roadway and then trying to figure out the priorities for the people who live on the road versus the people who are going from point A to point B. Now, one additional breakdown that has come out in the last 25 to 30 years, and is actually a pretty good one to think about, is within the local roads, you may want to think about very low volume or low volume. Again, different people have terminology, but I'll use what AASHTO uses. AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, for those who care. They define very low volume as less than 400 vehicles a day. So how do I know if I've got less than 400 vehicles a day? Well, I'm going to show you a trick for estimating traffic. Now, you could always go on the web to the data traffic viewer that exists. It's a pretty cool website. Every bridge in the state gets a traffic count at least once every 2 years as part of the inspection cycle. Obviously, the main roads are counted by the state. So there's good data out there. But if you want to estimate traffic, I got a trick for you. Here's the thing. The busiest hour of the day, which you typically know, is a lot of times in the afternoon when people are leaving work because they want to get home, or maybe in the morning when they're all going to school or some big business. But that busiest hour of the day is a certain percentage of traffic. In rural area, it's about 15% of the traffic that goes down the roadway. In an urban area, that amount is about 11%. Okay, so 15% or 11%, you can take advantage of that. So what you can do is you can go out and you can count for 15 minutes. Okay, so we'll do a traffic count for 15 minutes, multiply that times 4 to get a 1 hour count, and divide it by that percentage, and you actually have a pretty reasonable estimate of the traffic count. You could also use a factor. We can preset the factor if you want. So for a rural area, that would be 27, and an urban area, it would be 36. Okay. But one way to think about it is this. If you're standing in a rural area and you have 1 vehicle a minute going by you, that's 15 vehicles in 15 minutes. Multiply that times 4, you get 60. Divide that by 0.15, you get 400. That's where that number comes from, if you want the honest truth. It's about 1 vehicle a minute in a rural area is about 400 vehicles a day. Okay, in an urban area, it would be slightly higher. Okay, so it would be upwards 500, 600 vehicles. But the point is, you can use this as a rough estimate that's actually pretty darn good for total traffic, and then you can break it down by the types of vehicles using the roadway. Now, in terms of who's maintaining all of this, the principal arterial systems are only 5 to 10% of the total length. You know, the interstate system isn't very long. The national highway system isn't very long. But in terms of traffic volume, it still takes the bulk of the traffic. And depending where you are, it can be from 40 to 65% of the traffic on that principal system. In fact, if you take all the arterials together, you're going to be pushing 80, 90% of the traffic in a lot of places, depending where you are, of course. Collectors don't take a lot of traffic. They're the county system for the most part here in New York State. They don't take a lot of volume. They don't have a lot of length, but boy, are they critical. Imagine not having the things connecting from your capillaries to the arteries in your system, you'd have a problem. They're vitally important for that overall network. And then, of course, as I said earlier, everybody wants to live on a local road system, which is a pretty high percentage of the centerline mileage. And of course, on all of this, we have to move things. We move them by truck. So in the Q&A, let's just see how people do. In the Q&A, tell me, what percentage of goods do you think are transported by truck? What percentage of goods do you think are transported by truck here in the United States? And by the way, coming out of COVID, the numbers had been skewed, but they're going right back towards this number once we get our problems with our chain solved. 80%, I see. Okay, 80%. We're getting 80% guesses. Yeah, I got a couple of people who are brave enough to put in 80%. Turns out, by the way, the answer is actually a little less than that. Okay, the actual answer is closer to 70% of goods are transported by truck. One of the things we don't think about sometimes is the number of things that are transported by pipeline or water. A lot of goods by weight and by volume, if you do it that way, are transported via pipelines. All of our natural gas, a lot of our fuels, things like that. So again, some people will argue it's slightly higher for, you know, home goods and things like that, but total goods, it's about 70%. The number ranges, you know, pretty close to 70. And as I say, had been skewed during COVID, went way up, then way down, and now it's coming back again towards where we'd expect it to be. So let's just look at a map and think about this. Happens to be the map at Cornell University. So the red roads around Cornell are classified by the National Highway System and the Federal Highway Administration and the state DOT as arterials. Okay, and if you know Ithaca, you know these roads are going around the university. Okay, and then the blue roads are the collectors, and there's even one collector that goes through the campus that's actually managed by the town of Ithaca. So everything else is technically local. But if you're managing the system, if you're Cornell University, you actually manage most of the roads inside of that blue and red sort of semi-rectangle, with a couple of exceptions maintained by the city or the town. The city is the dark gray and the town is the white. But when you're managing your own system, you're going to break it down beyond that, because you don't necessarily have anything but local roads, but there's certainly more important roads in a particular community. Okay, so you want to reclassify things in a different way to manage the system for your road system. So you want to break it down. That's why those extra kind of classifications can come into play, and they can be very helpful when you're trying to manage a system. So something to think about. Now, let's talk a little bit about structure, okay? Now, here's a picture of our old director, Lynn Irwin, pointing at a pothole, and some people will say, well, the pothole slows people down. I see a pothole as a structural problem because we build pavements for a reason, okay? People want to know, we talked about why we build them for moving goods and services, but to do it right, we need a smooth surface. A smooth surface actually takes less energy. It's actually less damage on the vehicles. It costs less driving down the roadway. And to do this, we have to put a pavement over a subgrade. There is a structure involved. We certainly don't want roads that look like this, okay? This is what a lot of roads look like now 115, 120 years ago in the middle of the good roads movement in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But the idea is we got to work at the drainage, and we really need to worry about the structure of the roadway. So when we build a pavement, we worry about the road fatiguing. It breaks down like a paper clip. You bend it back and forth, and eventually it snaps. Not because you overloaded the paper clip, because you were frustrated on the phone waiting for the person to get back to you, and you had to listen to music for 45 minutes. The thing about it is, with pavements, it's based upon the amount of movement, the strain that the pavement sees. And to illustrate this, I'll show you part of a video that we've got. Again, this is available online if you're interested. You can actually look at weather and loads and watch the two green dots that come up in the video here that are being shown as a test that was done out by the U.S. Forest Service out in the western United States. And it might be a little herky-jerky. We'll see how my internet connection is. There you go. You can see the pavement actually moving underneath the truck. Okay, it's actually moving. Now, every pavement does this. This particular one was built with a really high water table so that it would fail prematurely for what we would like. But it was a research project, and so they did a good job of destroying the roadway in about 81 passes. Okay. The concept, though, is the more movement, the faster it's going to break down. And where do we care about our structure? Well, we care about the rutting on the subgrade, okay, directly under the load, right on top of the native material that we build. And we care about the cracking in the asphalt due to the tires. And that cracking could be at the bottom due to the movement of the pavement. It could actually be due to the high pressure tires that we get with radial tires. That high pressure in the tires can actually lead to cracking at the top. But the point is, pavements fail because they move a lot. And obviously that means if we got a lot of water, we're going to have a lot of movement, okay? And of course, the heavier the vehicle, the more it's going to damage the roadway. So when it comes to damage of trucks versus cars, again, in the Q&A, let's see how brave you are. How many passes of a car equal the damage of the pass of one truck? I'm going to take a guess, and then I'll explain what the answer is. You might want to take a guess. 5, 1,000, 100, 200. Okay. So the amount of damage that's done is related to the fourth power. I know, going all the way back to elementary school. Remember power? Okay. So you take a number and you raise it to the fourth power. So if I double the load, that's 2 to the fourth power, which becomes 16. Okay. So I double the load. I go from a truck that weighs 10 tons to 20. I'm doing 16 times the damage. So if I go from a 3-ton car to a 30-ton truck, that's 10 to the fourth power. That's 1 with 4 zeros behind it, or 10,000. Now, it's not 10,000 because trucks have more tires. So when we do the math, it turns out it's between 4,000 to 6,000 car trips are needed to equal the damage of one fully loaded 10-wheel dump truck. Okay, and of course, you've got a semi-truck, it may be different. In fact, in some cases, it's less damage because it's out on more wheels. An 18-wheeler spreads that load out. But it could be even more, like a snowplow in the late winter, early spring, when everything's soft, can actually do more damage because it's legally allowed to carry a heavier load. The point is, we have to build the road to handle the loads. And that makes a huge difference. In fact, in some cases, you have to worry about a single load, which is rather rare, but it does happen. Imagine trying to design for this. Now, there are different surface materials that are available for roadways. Some people love their gravel. Some people love their asphalt paving. But the key is the surfacing helps with drainage, and the surface helps with dealing with the tires and the trucks and all that stuff. This is a wooden street in Philadelphia. What other kind of surface materials have you seen or worked on in your career? Maybe somebody's worked on wood, but you know, what other kind of surfaces have you worked on? Brick? Oh yeah, we got brick streets. Modern bricks really just concrete pavers. Mud, hopefully a little bit more than mud, but we saw a picture of that earlier. Yeah, stone, cobblestones. Certainly parts of the world, cobblestones are major. Asphalt is probably our most common surface. Gravel or unpaved roads are certainly a big issue. The key is, whatever the surfacing is, we have to realize that underneath it, there is a gravel layer. There is a layer that's going to do actually a lot of the work, especially on the lower volume roadway system. And if that material isn't the right material, it doesn't matter what we put on the surface. Okay? Here had been a gravel road and they covered it with a chip seal. It didn't survive because the gravel that was there wasn't a good base. We need to put the right material down to handle the loads to be able to have the roadway survive. So again, build the road to handle the loads, and whether it's a gravel road, a brick paver, concrete or asphalt, there is a design, there is a structure there. And we probably need to be designing our roads more than we are. Most of the time we just use a catalog or do what we've always done. Now, of course, I worry about drainage. That's a major issue that we have to deal with. And of course, if we have poor drainage, it, again, doesn't matter what the structure is. So keep in mind when you're thinking about the basics of a good road that drainage is probably the single most important factor that we have to deal with when it comes to the commandments for a good road, which we'll end with, by the way. So hopefully all the agencies you're working with have a good maintenance program, but if you're going to do maintenance, you've got to pick good maintenance, the proper maintenance. In fact, most of the time, we don't do the maintenance early enough, and we tend to want to cut maintenance. Oh, we can defer it. If I have a choice, I'd rather defer capital work than maintenance. Maintenance is key. Think about the roof on your house. A little bit of maintenance, fixing a few shingles now and then, is a lot cheaper than having to replace the entire roof. And again, as I said earlier, it costs us less money. Here's an example. A town was spending $30,000 a year 30 years ago. So we're probably talking double that or more. And it wasn't really helping. It was actually making things worse. I'd rather do nothing than do a poor repair. Okay? Because what happens with pavements is they start off in good shape. We build roads in pretty good shape, but they slowly deteriorate over time. And if you're willing to put in $1 early, before you see the cracking, before it becomes to pothole, you can save that roadway and have it survive. Otherwise, it's going to cost you $4 to $5 per unit. Heck, it could be 10 or more actually by the time it gets to the very poor condition, because that's how pavements work. So we need to have a maintenance plan in place to have really good roadways. It's cheaper to do so. And then, of course, I don't want to forget about geometry. Geometry is absolutely key to a good roadway. So let's just ask, what does the public need? So I'm going to give you 3 choices, and then we'll see which one you would choose. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, you can only have one choice. Do you need 10 feet? It's a 10-foot wide gravel roadway. Do you need 22 feet between the lines? Lines aren't painted on this one, but they're about to get painted. Or do you need 36 feet between curb to curb? If those were your only 3 choices, which one would you vote for? If you only could choose one. We'll see. I bet I know the answer most people will vote for. So some of you say 22, some of you say 36, and a few of you are saying except that would be the standard you'd want. But the reality is we need to have a set of standards that deals with different roadways, because like it or not, all of those roads were actually serving the needs of the public in that case. So if we look back at those 3 roadways, when my computer wakes up, there we go. That 10-foot roadway is serving 3.5, I say 3.5 houses because one's on a corner and has a driveway off the road that it intersects. It doesn't need to be that wide. As long as there's enough room for people to pass now and then, have access for, safety equipment, fire equipment, things like that, that serves the needs of that little small stretch of houses. 22 feet, that's a collector. If it's a county road with a good shoulder, 22 feet is probably pretty good most of the time. But if you're in an urban area where you've got bike lanes and parking, or maybe in a bus lane or two, you might need that wider width. But that leads us to the problem of what people tend to want to do. They want to pick a standard. But what we really need is a range of standards, okay? And it may be as narrow as 10 feet. It may be as wide as 36. Again, we're trying to balance. We don't want it to be too wide, because if it's too wide, people speed. Yet at the same time, if it's too narrow, it creates other safety concerns. So it's a balancing act, and there are plenty of standards out there. Okay, in fact, we'll talk about standards a little bit if you don't have one. Now, one of the things safety comes about is stopping sight distance. This is the distance it takes for a vehicle to stop once they see something and they want to hit. Okay, so there's an object in front of them, back end of a bumper, a big rock, a deer, a moose, a bear. They want to hit it. So there's the perception reaction distance, and then there's the stopping distance. The stopping distance is based upon the friction on the roadway. It's based upon the vehicle itself, but we have standards for that that fits most vehicles, okay? It's the perception reaction where we have an issue, because most people react pretty quick if they're aware of something. It's the I'm not aware of it kind of thing that makes a big difference. Perception reaction for most people is 1 to 1.5 seconds, but we design for 2.5 seconds of reaction time. And the reason for that is we want to get most drivers, about 85%. That's a 85th percentile comes up again and again and again. And that turns out to be a pretty conservative value, but that means we've taken care of most drivers. Now, we can't solve everybody's problems, and we are worried about things like this. So we've actually added something called the decision sight distance into the standards that gives a little bit longer distance in an urban area where there's a lot more conflict, there's a lot more distractions. So on a 30-mile-an-hour roadway that might only be a couple of 100 feet to stop a vehicle, you might be as much as 500 feet in a really dense, busy urban area in terms of what you'd like to have for sight distance, okay? Now, of course, none of this solves the problem of somebody on their cell phone. In the Q&A, can you tell me how much extra time I need if I've got a cell phone in my hand and I'm trying to text? How much extra reaction time do I need? Let's see what somebody comes up with. Yeah, that one's sticking. That's good. Yeah, 5 seconds. That's an additional 5 seconds. Now, if you want to know how fast you're traveling, take the speed limit, or the speed people are driving, and multiply it by 1.5. Yeah, I know technically it's 1.47, but let's just multiply by 1.5. It's close enough. So at 30 miles an hour, that's 45 feet per second. At 60 miles an hour, in a more rural area, state speed limit, they're going slightly above it. At 60 miles an hour, that's 90 feet per second. And if you go 5 seconds, that's 450 feet. Next time you're riding in a vehicle, not driving, please. When you're riding in a vehicle, close your eyes for 5 seconds. Think about what you've missed. So we do need to put those phones down. The temptation is great, but the risk is really high. Okay? Now, as highway officials, as folks managing highway systems, one of the things we can do to increase reaction time, one of the things we can do to make things a lot safer is provide good information with our signage. Signage is absolutely key. In fact, we'll have a whole webinar on signage. It's that important. We also have one on traffic safety coming up. It's also that important. But good signage is absolutely critical. Okay? Here's a classic one. I've taken this photo probably 23 years ago now that I'm thinking about it. It's been a while. That sign doesn't mean anything. That's the sign. It looks bright during the day, but at night there's no retroreflectivity. You can't see it. And sharp bend, what does that tell the public? If you know you have to go to the left, but wouldn't we be better off to put up the signs that everybody's familiar with? Chevrons or arrows, an advanced sign that says, hey, you got to turn. Sure, it's a work zone and theoretically these should be orange, but I'll tell you what, if that's what you got in stock, that'd be better than a sign that says sharp bend, right? So again, think about how we communicate with the public, how much reaction time they've got, how busy our signs can be, okay? Now, horizontal alignment matters. There's whole books written on horizontal alignments. There's certainly stuff in the geometric standards on that. But again, think about the users. If you're in a tight urban area and you want to get around an intersection, they put a little mini roundabout here in the city of Ithaca. Can the trucks make it around? Think about that. Can the fire equipment get around there? Do you have to change the parking patterns to let people get around that safely? Can they drive over the curb safely without damaging the tires? There are things we can do for horizontal alignment, both urban and rural, but think about the users as much as anything else. And if you're not sure, be willing to change it afterwards. Go back and check it out. Now, in a rural area where people are going higher speed, we'll actually super elevate the roadway. So going around the corners, it's a little safer and you have more control. But the thing about super elevation that we sometimes forget, as we're putting these curves in, we may actually want to widen them out slightly so that vehicles as they track don't wind up swerving into the other lane as they got super elevation. You can only have so much super elevation in a rural area where you got snow. And like it or not, New York, we do get snow. I know we haven't seen any yet this year, but we will get snow. We know that. So you have to be limited in terms of how much super elevation you can have. And of course, there's lots of standards out there for intersections. Intersections, the closer to 90, the safer they are in terms of the degree that you come in. The geometry really matters. The traffic control matters. Who's got priority? Are there bicyclists? Are there trucks? How do you deal with all of that? There are intersections where most of our serious issues occur, unless, of course, we get rural roads where people run off the roadway. But intersections in an urban area are a major issue. And then, of course, vertical alignment. We aren't in a nice flat area, unless you're up in Genesee County or out Long Island. And even there's some vertical alignments you have to deal with. And if the roadway is really steep, that becomes something we have to account for. There's minimum and maximum standards for that as well. Certainly, this road here is an 18% grade. That's going to be tough. In fact, in this particular case, it had been seasonal, and they had to actually widen it out and open it up because the house you see on the right had a kindergartner in it. And once they allowed them to build the house, they had to be able to make it where the bus could stop safely about halfway up a pretty darn steep hill. So there are standards for this. There are standards for horizontal and vertical curves, which are very important. And again, good signage makes a huge difference. Thinking about the corners makes a big difference. And of course, how you bring the super elevation in and out of that makes a big difference. And again, we'll have a webinar specifically on traffic safety later on. So, clear zone, right? Everybody should have a clear zone standard. Does anybody know what the clear zone standard is for your agency, or for those of you who are consultants, what you recommend for a clear zone? You can put that in the Q&A for me. What do you think your clear zone should be? See what y'all think the clear zone should be. 12 feet, I see a 20 feet. I see 12 again. Cool. 15. And you may have actually heard some people like a 30-foot clear zone. That comes from some testing done by General Motors when vehicles would run off at their test track. Well, if you don't have anything to worry about hitting, you are going to wind up way out there because you're not worried about it. You're just trying to control the vehicle. But most of the time, we're not going to get 30 feet. In fact, 30 feet, we probably wouldn't like our road system. It'd be too busy with just a big open area. The interstates shoot for that, but then again, they're really, really high speed. Just like the width of the roadway, the clear zone actually probably should change with the roadway type. You can set a standard, but a consistent clear zone is really important. And once you have a clear zone, make sure you set that clear zone and keep it clear. Don't want anything that vehicles can hit and go stop. That would be bad. In this particular case, it looks like if I have a problem, going off to the right is a problem because I got that ditch and I got something that might hit, so I swing off to the left and I go into the grass, right? That would be a really bad day. See the stumps? Anything above about 4 inches could snag a vehicle. And in this case, it's a lot more than 4. If you do take trees down, cut them flush and try to be consistent with that. So in terms of what do we have for standards? Well, there are tons of standards out there. So I'm going to now ask you to raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have a set of geometric standards for roadways that you use on a regular basis. Just raise your hand. Let's see how many of you out of the 30 of you, so raise your hand. So only about a third of you have raised your hand. Okay. Okay. Everyone should have standards. There's 3 reasons to have standards. Number 1, it's communication. We actually communicate with the public and with each other what we're going to build to. Number 2, liability. If you don't have a set of standards, someone else could bring it in, like the AASHTO Green Book. They could say, hey, that's the standards you should have to follow. And by the way, you may have also heard of the New York State Highway Design Manual. They're great standards and they're useful, but they're probably overkill for a low volume roadway. So do you want to be held to somebody else's standard? And of course, finally, it gives us something to help us with our budgeting, our management, and it improves safety by having consistency with the public. If you've got a roadway that's got less than 2,000 vehicles a day, there actually is a standard put out by AASHTO, was last put out in 2019, and it includes almost all the road system that we've got, and it has stuff for both urban and rural, and we actually support it. We actually have a set of standards on our website that reference the AASHTO standards. If you're interested, you can go on our website and search for road standards. You could develop your own, and that's fine. The thing about it is, if you're going to develop a standard, you want to go back to a national or state standard, and just as importantly, you really need to have it checked by an engineer from a liability standpoint. Nice thing about using somebody else's, they've already done that preliminary work, and so you know you're in pretty good shape, okay? So again, everybody should have a standard. Every municipality should adopt a set of standards for communication, for helping with planning and budgeting, and it really does help with safety, okay? So what I want to do now is I want to talk about the 10 commandments for good roads. This goes back to when we had an old basics of the road class, which we now call local roads done right. And the instructor who was doing it liked to talk about the 10 commandments of good roads, okay? So again, I'm going to ask you for each one in the Q&A. Do me a favor in the Q&A, tell me why this is an important commandment, okay? So our first one is get the water away from the roadway. Why is getting water away from the roadway a good idea? Again, throw it in the Q&A. It actually is a safety issue. You get ponding on the water, like our friends here that Jay Olson took the picture that says drainage is critical for roadway design and ducts are an indicator of poor drainage. Yeah, it's a safety issue. It protects the base and the subbase. Almost all of our premature failures is because we have excess water. Water is actually needed. We need some water, but excess water is a problem. So yeah, single most important thing that we can do really help get the water away from the roadway. We need to build on a firm foundation, okay? Why is that important? Why do we want to build on a firm foundation? Why do we want to build on a firm foundation? And what do I mean by that? A little bit more challenging. Yeah, we're going to distribute the load. We want to make sure that the subgrade that we're on top of, that we've taken that into account. We've designed the road to handle the loads. It gives us a longer structure. It lasts longer. Now, this particular road was damaged by an earthquake and a landslide, but again, we need to have a good firm foundation. So if we've got a soft spot, we may want to spend the money to box that out. We may want to put in a geocell. We may want to do something to make sure the roadway itself is going to survive. And the thing about it is, if you spend the money on the foundation, it's easier to fix the surface, okay? Better to have it fail than cracking in the surface than have to deal with rotting at the bottom, okay? Use the best materials available, okay? And here's the winner of the Not My Job Award from Arizona DOT. But what do I mean by using the best materials and why is that so critical? And this one sometimes is hard as a sell to the elected boards. I know this, okay? but using the best materials is absolutely key to good roadways. Long-term life. We need to be doing life cycle costing. We need to look at what's best long-term. Do you want to put down terrazzo tile or vinyl tile on a floor in a house or in an industrial area? Sure, the vinyl is cheaper, but 2 or 3 years later, it's broken up. The terrazzo is there for decades. Same thing is true with our paving. Spend the money on good materials that last longer. When you fill potholes, make sure you fill them with the right stuff so that they last a long time. Yes, it's cheaper to just do a quick buy the cheap stuff, but you can pay me now or you can pay me later, as they used to say in that old oil filter ad. You need to compact all the materials well, okay? So why is that critical? It's absolutely critical, but why is it so critical to compact all materials well? I'm waiting. Yeah, you don't want to settle. I hate culverts that we find the hard way because they settle, okay? You don't get the strength that you want. It actually lasts longer. And that's true both for packing in a culvert pipe or for paving your asphalt. This picture here shows one of those little mini vibrators. They look great on the surface, but they're not really putting down that much compaction. Spend the money to get things compacted to the level you want. You don't want voids, as one of you said. You want a good uniform surface. Things last longer, okay? We do live in New York State. We have to design for winter maintenance, okay? What kind of things do we have to worry about for winter maintenance that maybe you don't have to worry about as much in an area where we don't get as much snow as we get here? You got to worry about salt, freeze-thaw issues. Yep. Snow storage, especially in urban areas. Where are you going to put the snow? I'm a huge fan of roundabouts. Ontario County has some pretty cool stuff with roundabouts. You see roundabouts all the time. But the ones that are done well, they thought about the snow plow going around. Because, yeah, you got to account for the damage. You put things in wrong, it can be hard to maintain, and it can actually damage the roadway. You got to deal with where the water is going to run off when you do put down the salt, and not use more salt than you absolutely need, but enough to keep the roads as safe as possibly can for a reasonable budget. Okay? Now, I've said this one several times, so hopefully this one you've got in your head, but you need to design for the traffic loads and the volumes on the roadway, okay? You need to build the road to handle the loads. And the reason is it's cheaper for you and for the drivers, okay? Now, what kind of traffic loads do we have to deal with? Well, most of the time we're dealing with traffic heavier than this, traffic here, but yeah, you want to deal with the roads and the loads. Some agencies do like to post the roadways for weight limits. Here's one that's an 8-ton posting. But is that 8-ton posting because we didn't want to spend the money to bring the road up? Or is it just an old roadway and we're behind? Okay? We shouldn't be using posting as a political tool. We should be using it as a, we aren't there yet. We should build the roads to handle the loads. You should only pave the roads when they're ready to be paved. The day after I took this picture, they overlaid it. Why is this critical? Why should we pave the roads only when they're ready? And what do I mean by ready? It won't last. You're going to be masking the problems. We love to do it. Let's pave the road. The election's coming up. But it's not going to last. We know that it's going to start to crack in just a couple of years with a couple inch overlay. It's going to reflect back through. There's actually water standing there. Okay? Yeah, it's going to cost more. There's a time limit involved. The thing about this is we need to do maintenance earlier than we think. An overlay before it begins to crack. Crack repairs when they first start to occur. Chip seals long before we start seeing cracking. And in terms of when to pave, hope nobody's paving now, but I know some people still are because the plants are still open. They'll pave right up until the plants close, and yet the chances of survival go way down. So paving the road when ready includes paving in the right season. Okay, so think about that, especially when you're using emulsions and cold mixes, but even hot mix has a limitation. You got to build from the bottom up. You've got to make sure you have a firm foundation. Okay. Yeah, I said something like this before with a firm foundation. That's why it's so critical. Think about the bottom. Always start with what you've got underneath. That's going to drive a lot of what we do. And again, as we see in the picture, think about the water in this particular case. Okay. So look at what's underneath before making a final call. And by the way, of course, that means before you dig, what phone number do you call before you dig? Everybody remember that phone number? Let's see if everybody in the Q&A knows the phone number you always call. 811. Yeah. Okay. Now I got a great question here. Ooh, I like this. What is the best temperature to pave the roadway? There's not so much a best temperature, but there are limitations. You really want the pavement temperature, and the ground temperature is the number I'm talking about, not the air temperature. The pavement temperature at least 50 degrees. Okay. And now if it's cool, it's warming up, you're probably going to be okay. But if the ground temperature is below that or close to it and it's getting cooler, you're going to have a problem. You may not get as good a bond. Your asphalt's going to cool too quick to pave it. And by the way, maybe even a little bit warmer with hot mixes. You can be too hot, by the way. There is a limit, especially with emulsions, where it can actually get too hot. And when we talk about asphalt materials with one of our webinars later, we can certainly talk about that. But in terms of the best temperature, it's more of a, what are the limitations? And when it does get cooler, you got to get more rollers on the job. You've got to take care of getting the material compacted sooner. Okay? You got to protect your investment. The number one thing you got to do is maintenance. Maintenance, maintenance, and maintenance. Again, don't cut that. Pay me now or pay me later. Put up good signs. Protect your investment. Okay? Keep good records. Now, this one is a liability concern, of course, and we worry about liability. But boy, records help you a lot. When I was with Yates County before I came here to the LTAP Center at Cornell, we had a bridge they wanted us to close because it supposedly didn't have any foundations underneath this big concrete abutment. But it was an old state bridge, and it was a crusty old guy who knew where the old plans were. So we went to a dusty room, we pulled out the drawer, and sure enough, there were the plans, and there were the piles. And there were piles underneath. Those records kept a bridge open that was needed for an emergency detour about 2 years later. So good records really help. That means you want to put your name on it, the date on it, where you're located, the weather. Keep good records. And again, from a liability standpoint, how do you know what you don't know? If you don't know, you don't know it. Okay. And where are those records? Can you find them? Again, let's just see. How many of you keep a log? Raise your hand if you keep a daily log. 1, 2, a few of you. If you work in the government sector, keep a daily log. Yes, these days email could be used as a daily log, probably. But again, keeping a log of weather, things like that can be very helpful later on. Okay. So now we're getting into our PDH question phase. So this time you got an answer here. So let's see. Again, what percentage of goods are transported by truck? Let's see what y'all think. 70%. A lot of you voting for 70. Hey, y'all remember, that's good. The key here, the thing to take home for this, okay, is around 70. Some people argue it's slightly higher, and yes, you're welcome to use a Q&A if the poll doesn't work for you. The key here is most of our goods are moved by truck. And so we need to have a good transportation system to get items from point A to point B. This is critical. It's how we get things delivered to home. That's how when we order it via X, Y, and Z off the internet, that's how it's going to get delivered. Truck transportation is so critical for getting from point A to point B. How many car passes are needed to do the damage of one fully loaded truck? And we got a lot of people putting down D. A couple of people said E. Okay, yeah. Typically, we find it's around 4,000 to 6,000. It does vary depending on the truck, of course. And of course, the weather actually turns out to actually make a difference. In the spring, the truck actually does more damage. Okay. Sometimes actually going to a bigger truck with more wheels will actually reduce the amount of damage, which is counterintuitive, but it actually works out. But yeah, when we design the road for structure, the thickness, trucks are the driver. When we design for geometry, we have to look at all vehicles, and a lot of times cars, pedestrians, and bicyclists are the drivers. But we have to account for all the vehicles that are using a particular roadway to make things work out. Okay? So, what's the perception reaction time we use in geometric design? And again, if you can't get on the poll EV, just put it into the Q&A. That's fine. 2.5, 3, C, okay. So the answer in this case is 2.5 seconds. That's the reaction time we use in geometric design. We have increased some of the distances for hazards in urban and rural areas, but that's based upon the distractions and things like that. We're still using the same reaction time. But just think about people putting down that cell phone, trying to not be distracted, okay? Even if using hands-free, we actually know that distracts people. So think about dealing with that issue, slowing people down, okay? Now, I'm just about done with my slide set. I got a couple last things to do here. So let's finish up, ask this question again. Why do we build roads and streets? Why do we build roads and streets? Any new ideas for me? We've got commerce, we've got travel, we've got safety. Yeah, we have to balance all of these. Accessibility, community, all of these things come into play. Most people don't think about the value of their road system, but think about the last time there was a major weather event. Think about the last time there was a big fire or a crash. That network got dropped out. It's really important to have a good network. It's important for us as our community. It's important for us from safety. And that means we have to build the road to handle the loads. Okay. Now we have more of these webinars coming up. These will be posted online, by the way, for people who weren't able to make it. Next week, we're talking about snow and ice strategies for the upcoming winter, hopefully. We're going to be doing budget basics in December, after the start of December, traffic safety, and then we'll finish up the year with a session on complete streets. The ones with the stars will definitely be worth a PDH. We're looking at the others, but once we see the slide deck, we can make a final decision on those. So if you need a professional development hour, you can get that. And again, I'm here to answer any questions that you've got. If you want to try to stump me, that's great. I like trying to get stumped, that's fine. Otherwise, you can go on our website and you can find us, by the way, just search for New York State LTAP, Cornell Local Roads. Don't search for David Orr. You get some weird searches if you do that, but everything else will work. And any questions you've got, we like to answer them. And everybody have yourself a great week. And hopefully we'll see you after Thanksgiving. Have some fun. Eat some turkey if you like turkey and a pumpkin pie. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.